I wish I could paint a dramatic picture of how I discovered my wife's betrayal. But the truth is, it was like a scene from a bad, cliched novel. I work at an auto parts factory, producing brakes. The job isn't glamorous, but it keeps the lights on. I consider myself fortunate, spending 8 hours a day from 4 p.m. to midnight, 5 days a week, operating an ancient machine, clad in safety gear, eye protection, earplugs, steel-toed shoes, and a denim apron. I meet my daily quota, and if I'm lucky, I might snag a year-end bonus. I have a cozy 3-bedroom house, a wife named Lydia, and 2 sons in elementary school. After 12 years of marriage, I thought everything was steady, until today. Our factory has 5 stations for assembling brake shoes, all powered by compressed air. In my 8 years on the job, we've never had equipment issues. But today, halfway through my shift, the compressed air system broke down. The air needs to be completely dry to function properly, filtered and dehydrated by automatic equipment. But today, it failed. The dehydrator didn't expel the moisture as it should have. I'm no expert, but I know that when moisture mixes with high-pressure air, everything freezes, and work grinds to a halt. Instead of waiting around, they sent us home without pay. It's ironic, my whole life thrown off track by high humidity. Walking into my bedroom, I was greeted by the sight of a hairy back moving on top of Lydia. Instinctively, I flicked on the overhead light. Lydia wasn't asleep. She glared at me, annoyed, and asked what I was doing there. I expected fear, apology, or shame, but she was furious instead. When I asked why she was mad, she snapped that I knew exactly what was going on. She regretted that I had to see it, but blamed me for not being home on time. According to her, if I'd been on schedule, the other man wouldn't have been there, and she wouldn't have been caught. The guy, previously hidden by the bed, turned and smirked at me. Lydia half-heartedly pulled the covers up for modesty. My mistake was grabbing him as he got off the bed. Standing up, he seemed much larger. For my trouble, I got 2 brutal blows to the ribs. I didn't land a single punch before I was on the floor, struggling to breathe. I think I got hit on the side of my head, and then everything went black. I woke up in the hospital, my ribs being bandaged by a medical technician. Lydia was nearby, looking disgusted. Once the technician left, I confronted her. Who was that guy, and why was he in our house? His name's Dominic. He's a friend, and I invited him over, she replied nonchalantly. You were with him? In our bed? With our kids just down the hall? Yeah, I know. If you hadn't made a scene, they wouldn't have woken up. What was he doing here? How many times are you going to ask? Dominic and I have been seeing each other for about 6 months. We tried to keep it from you. We don't usually come here, but I couldn't find a sitter. Is it over now? No, it's not, Nate. You're a good dad and husband, but Dominic's great in bed. I don't see why we should end it just because you found out. But I promise we won't meet here anymore. It's not fair to you or the kids. Lydia, that's not okay. It ends now. Nate, if you try to interfere with my relationship with Dominic, you'll regret it. He can smack you around easily, and he'll do it again if you push it. Everyone will know you're a loser, our friends, family, even your co-workers. Your life will be a nightmare. Don't you care what anyone thinks? You'd go that low just to hurt me, if I have to? But I doubt you'll risk it. Dominic thinks you're a loser, and I agree. You'll have to live with it, Nate boy. Who is he anyway? Where does he work? He doesn't work. He owns Continental Classics, the luxury car place on Lancaster Pike. You know, the one you always wanted to visit but never did? He's richer, smarter, and better in bed than you. He's also stronger and better with his fists. Why not marry him if he's so great? That's why I keep you, darling. Dominic doesn't want kids, and I won't give mine up. You'll play house while he gets the love. You either accept it, or everyone will know what a loser you are. And by the way, I'm moving your stuff to the guest room. No need to share a bed now that it's out there. Who watched the kids when you were with Dominic? Usually Rachel, sometimes your parents. Speaking of which, Rachel introduced me to Dominic. I'll thank her later. The following morning, they discharged me, but Lydia wasn't around. I debated calling someone or taking a taxi. The taxi won. With the kids at school and Lydia gone, I found all my clothes and personal belongings stacked on the guest bed. I figured Logan and Mason might have questions, but I decided Lydia could handle it. Setting up my new living space took less than an hour. Various thoughts raced through my mind, but I wasn't going to let things play out as Lydia intended. My first move was retrieving my old phone recorder from the basement. It only worked with the landline, but it was my only option. Lydia mainly used her cell phone for calls. Setting it up and hiding it behind some old paint cans took about 20 minutes. It was a start. Feeling awful, I still dragged myself back to work. They offered me pain pills, but I didn't want to take them and then operate machinery. A couple of heavy-duty Tylenols seemed like the better choice. Lydia seriously underestimated my relationship with my coworkers. I told them everything that had happened. They all came up with ideas, some better than others. It was comforting to know my friends had my back. With an 8-hour shift ahead, we all planned to find ways to fix this. During our mid-shift break for supper, Grant spoke up first. Any ideas? I don't have one, but I have a cousin who works for Santoro. He does vehicle detailing and hates him. He could provide intel on the business, buildings, or work shifts, Grant shared. That would be helpful, Grant. Anyone else? Nate, Jared offered. I have 2 muskets and 2 pistols. You're welcome to any of them. None are registered. Thanks, Jared, but that's a bit more extreme than I was considering, I said, trying to keep things in perspective. Don't even want to hear my idea? Leo interjected, a grin spreading across his face, followed by some laughter from the group. Tell us, Leo, come on, the guys urged him on. I thought we could tie him to a tree, legs spread, and build a bonfire between his legs, Indian style, Leo suggested. Although his idea was met with laughter, it was quickly shot down by everyone. Ethan, who hadn't spoken yet, felt the weight of our expectant gazes. What? Don't look at me like that. Yeah, I've got an idea, but it's a bit out there. Go on, Ethan, I encouraged him. I remember reading about a prison in Arizona where they dressed up sex offenders in pink jumpsuits to humiliate them. Now, I know Dominic isn't a sex offender, but something like that could embarrass him, Ethan explained. You mean put him in a pink jumpsuit? He'd just take it off, someone pointed out. I was thinking, if we could tie him up and then spray paint him entirely pink, that might do the trick, Ethan elaborated. But he'd know who did it. You'd have to knock him out first, then leave him tied to a chair until he's found. Do we use medication or just punch him? What's your plan? Someone asked. I can get a taser. You just have to sneak up and shock him, Ethan offered. You're making it sound easier than it probably is. How do we catch him alone and get close without him noticing? I questioned. I don't have all the answers, just thought it was an idea, Ethan admitted. The buzzer signaled another 4 hours on the machines. My quota was down, so the other guys pitched in to help. When I got home, Lydia was already in bed, keeping her promise not to bring Dominic into the house. I had no clue what to do. Most of the ideas the guys had were like high school pranks, like leaving a flaming bag of dog poop on his doorstep. I needed real revenge. The next day, after getting the kids to school and seeing Lydia move around the house, I showered, shaved, and headed out. Morning, husband. No kiss? She smirked from the sink. Ignoring her, I left, needing some lunch and alone time to figure out how to get back at Dominic without causing more trouble. Work was looming, and I needed to prepare. I decided to stop eating at home, the only time with the boys, because I couldn't stomach Lydia's cooking. Things were normal until supper break, when Adrian proudly announced he had a taser in his car for self-protection. Don't forget to pick it up, he reminded me. When he asked if I had ever used one, I said I hadn't, but we could try it out, eliciting groans from the others. Despite the lack of new ideas, their support made me feel better. At home, my routine was the same, though working the graveyard shift had messed up my sleep. Logan and Mason suggested going to Chuck E. Cheese, which Lydia didn't mind since they'd be out all day. Then she dropped a bombshell. You need to take a few vacation days. Dominic's friend Wally is visiting from Detroit next week, and we're planning to go on a cruise to Cancun. Seriously, Lydia? You want me to take time off so you can go on a sea cruise with 2 guys? I challenged. It's not what you think, she defended herself. Wally will be sharing a room with Rachel. They've been friends for years. Sure, that sounds dandy, I replied sarcastically, making a mental note to thank Rachel later. It seemed like it was going to be a long day. To pass time before Chuck E. Cheese opened, we visited Hobby Lobby. The boys were old enough to assemble most of the plastic models there. The end results weren't impressive, but they had a blast. I let them explore while I marveled at the crafts available for creative homemakers. If Lydia had been into crafts, maybe she wouldn't have brought home that hairy gorilla. Too late now. I was thrilled to find rows of designer paint and spray cans. 6 beautiful pink cans caught my eye. They didn't hold as much as the ones at Lowe's or Home Depot, but they were pink, It was the only place I'd seen paint that color in a spray can. I took it as a sign and bought all 6. Logan chose a monster truck kit, and Mason picked a tugboat. Before leaving, I grabbed a package of 10 large plastic cable wraps, about 18 inches long. They looked sturdy enough. Chuck E. Cheese was ready by then. The kids spent about 4 hours and 2 pizzas there before they got tired. We fed ducks in the park with cheap bread before heading to my parents' house. They were glad to have us for supper in the evening. Logan and Mason watched TV most of the night, while I briefed Dad on the situation with Lydia. I realized I was telling people about it before Lydia could. Her threat seemed less significant. Dad promised to take care of the boys, which eased my mind. Around 9 o'clock, I called Lydia to say we'd be staying at my parents' house. Got the machine. After a big breakfast at IHOP, we found Lydia still in bed. I started mowing the lawn while the boys worked on their models. Even though it was a beautiful day outside, I let them go. I decided to make a full day of the lawn work, including edging and pruning. Things didn't go as fast as usual because I found myself chatting a lot. I had hedge clippers but borrowed a set from Samuel Harrington across the street. His wife Evelyn loved gossip. I warned Samuel about unfamiliar cars at our house. If Lydia entertained male friends and they got rowdy, he should call the police. It was hard for me to manage things since I worked nights. Victor Morgan from the local church board lent me a spark plug wrench. I apologized for Lydia's recent behavior. Naturally, he was curious. Victor was even more of a gossip than Evelyn Harrington. In just 10 minutes, he had enough gossip to last a month. I skipped lunch and wrapped up work around 4 o'clock in the afternoon. After a quick shower, I headed to Rosie's Cantina and treated myself to the priciest dish on the menu. I'm not exactly sure what it was, but it was delicious. I spent the evening with my brother Dave and his family, feeling somewhat lighter for the first time in days. Dad had already filled my brother in on the mess, so I crashed on his couch for the night. Lydia had concocted a grand scheme to force me into accepting her infidelity by threatening to expose me as a cuckold if I didn't play along. She thought she could ruin my life, but her plan had a lot of holes. Within a week, it already told everyone what was happening, effectively nullifying her threat. I also managed to portray her as a sleazy adulteress, something she clearly didn't expect. The next afternoon, I swung by the house to change for work, and Lydia was there, fuming. She told me that Rachel had mentioned rumors spreading among the neighbors about her running a brothel at night. I tried to calm her down, explaining that I had only told the neighbors that she might have male visitors while I was at work, and that they shouldn't worry. But Lydia insisted that the rumors were spiraling out of control and demanded to know who else I had spoken to. I admitted that I had told everyone, thinking it would be simpler. I hadn't mentioned anything to her parents or sisters and suggested she handle that before they heard the rumors. Lydia was frustrated, feeling like the rumors made her look bad. I pointed out that the situation wasn't fair to me either, as it made me look like a betrayed fool. Lydia apologized but said she had to leave for work, mentioning that she had managed to spend some time with the boys before she left, though it wasn't the quality time she had hoped for. That night, Grant had some crucial information. Continental Classics shut down at 9 p.m. on Thursdays, so Dominic could handle the paychecks for Friday. He hated being disturbed while doing payroll, so even the cleaning crew was gone. Ethan took a few minutes to show me how to use the taser. No one volunteered to test it, but our plan was coming together. I fully expected to get caught and maybe even go to jail, but I didn't care. Dominic Santoro needed to be taken down a peg. If I got arrested, I'd make sure all the newspapers and TV stations got the full story. That kind of publicity would crush him, or at least push him to make a mistake. For the next few days, I only went home to sleep, shower, and change clothes. I hadn't eaten a meal at home since this whole ordeal started. Finally, Thursday arrived. I made sure my truck had a dead battery so Ethan could pick me up. The floor supervisor rarely bothered us brake guys. As long as we met our quotas and kept up the quality, they left us alone. With our aprons, gloves, and welding goggles, we all looked pretty much the same. At 8:30, I slipped out the back door. The guys took turns covering for me. One of their posts would be empty, but no one really cared. Bathroom breaks were normal and unregulated. The key was to make it look like I never left. I snuck into Continental Classics through the staff entrance and headed straight to the restroom. Around 9 o'clock, someone checked the area quickly before turning off the lights. 10 minutes later, I put on latex gloves and left the restroom, moving into a dimly lit office area. Dominic's desk faced the showroom, his back to the door. It was easier than I had anticipated. Despite the computer in front of him, he was using an old adding machine with paper tape. He didn't hear me approach. I zapped Dominic with the taser on the back of his neck. His body jerked upright. Fearing he might turn around, I zapped him again. This time he twitched a bit before relaxing. Perfect. I secured 2 plastic cable wraps on each limb and used an old necktie as a blindfold. He didn't resist. I rolled his chair to the showroom window where he'd be perfectly visible when his staff arrived in the morning. The pink paint absorbed into his clothing faster than I expected, requiring at least 3 coats to get the desired effect. I just had enough paint. He looked striking in pink. After finishing, I carefully packed everything up. I expected Dominic to wake up during the process, but he remained still. I planned to remove the blindfold before leaving, but I checked my watch several times and still wanted him to wake up before I left. 5 minutes later, I started to worry. I tried to feel for a pulse but couldn't find one. Maybe the latex gloves hindered my sensitivity. I removed a glove and tried again. Still nothing. I tried to find a pulse on his neck like they do on TV, but got nothing. I took off the blindfold and touched his eyeball with a pencil tip. No blink, no reflex. Panic set in. I quickly regained my composure, put the glove back on, and wiped down everything I might have touched. I pocketed the necktie and cut off all the plastic ties. Removing them revealed marks from the pink paint, which looked odd. The white skin where the necktie had been made him look like a pink raccoon. After ensuring I hadn't missed anything, I left. On my way back to the shop, I dumped all the evidence, including the taser, into a storm sewer. 10 minutes later, I was back at work making brake shoes. No one noticed I'd been gone. After the shift, I told the guys what had happened. They were all accomplices, so I was confident no one would spill. Leo was impressed, and none of them seemed worried. Ethan drove me home, and we both noted the time of his drop-off. I couldn't sleep as long as usual. Around 10 a.m., Lydia burst into my room. "What the hell did you do? What did you do, you idiot?" I rolled over and gave her a puzzled look. "What are you talking about, woman?" "Dominic's dead. Rachel called and said they found him in his office this morning, dead. I know you had something to do with it, and I'll make sure you pay, you idiot." That was the second time she called me an idiot in 5 minutes. It was clear I wasn't getting any more sleep, so I dragged myself out of bed and went to the bathroom. Not eager to face Lydia's wrath, I took a long, hot shower and shaved slowly, trying to figure out what to do next. I even splashed on some aftershave, hoping to irritate my dear wife. Before I could pour a cup of coffee, I saw a tall man in a dark suit standing in the living room talking to Lydia. His closely cropped hair and stern demeanor told me everything. I was dealing with a cop. Ignoring them, I headed into the kitchen to get my coffee. Lydia shot me a sarcastic smirk as I settled into my favorite recliner. My uninvited guest followed me. "Mr. Collins, I'm Detective Marcus Hale. I'm here about the death of Anthony Santoro last night. Your wife mentioned you had a disagreement with Mr. Santoro recently, and I was hoping to ask you a few questions." "Sure, no problem, but not here," I said, setting my coffee down. "What do you mean?" the detective asked. "If you want to talk, let's do it in your office, not in my home. Is that okay with you?" I asked, noticing the disappointment on Lydia's face. She clearly wanted to be part of the conversation. "Your car or mine, Mr. Collins?" he inquired. "I have some errands to run first, so I'll meet you there." "Which office?" "Second floor, rear room 26. Just turn right when you get off the elevator. I'll see you shortly." Lydia was fuming as I put on my shoes. I didn't finish my coffee, so I dumped it in the sink and walked out the door, smirking. "Looks like you're getting what you wanted, sweetheart," I said. "What are you talking about, Nate?" she snapped. 10 minutes later, I was sitting across from Detective Hale on the second floor of the municipal building. For the next hour, he questioned me thoroughly, and I gave him straightforward answers. He touched on the affair delicately, without being too blunt. Naturally, I admitted I had a motive, but I insisted I never had the opportunity to act on it. It was a serious matter, but I tried to be cooperative without being sarcastic. I think he appreciated my effort to make his job easier, even though I couldn't give him a clear answer. The most surprising part was learning that Dominic had died from a heart issue. He had a pacemaker installed a few years back, which didn't react well to the taser. They figured out the taser's involvement from the marks on his neck. I felt a mix of remorse and relief. Detective Hale gave me the usual don't leave town speech and said he'd contact me after confirming my alibi. It was unexpected. I never thought I'd need an alibi. We parted on good terms, and I sensed that Detective Hale was sympathetic, which was comforting. After grabbing a quick bite, I watched the local news. There was a segment about a local businessman's death, noting he had no family in the area. I withdrew money from our bank accounts and treated myself to a nice breakfast. There were things to take care of at home. When I returned, Lydia wasn't there, so I moved all my belongings to the master bedroom and put hers in the guest room. The guest room had limited storage, so I piled her things on the bed for her to organize. I checked the phone recorder in the basement, but found nothing of interest. Gathering important documents like banking and insurance records, I stashed them in a folder under the front seat of my truck. Lydia's Volvo was in my name, which made things easier. I called work and took a 2-week vacation. A few hours later, Lydia came home, surprised to find me there. It was time to lay down the law. I grinned as I escorted her to the guest room. "What's going on? Who do you think you are?" she demanded, her tone defiant. I told her, "I'll be using the master bedroom from now on. You can have the guest room. Start putting away your clothes. Anything left out by dinner will be thrown away. Any questions?" "I can't fit my stuff in that tiny closet, and I won't stay in that room." "What do you mean, thrown away?" "If it doesn't fit in the closet or dresser, you don't need it. This isn't up for debate." "Nate, you're in serious trouble. Get your act together. If you need clarification, ask later, idiot." That was the 3rd time that day she called me an idiot. I must be making some progress. While Lydia was busy in the guest room, I emptied her purse on the kitchen table. I took her cell phone and car keys. Then, from her wallet, I removed her driver's license, credit cards, debit cards, and cash. I left the rest. I retrieved her car title from the pickup and drove her Volvo to a friend who owned a car lot across town. I sold it to him outright at a fair price, with the understanding he'd sell it wholesale out of town. Even after settling the loan, I pocketed a few $1,000s. As I headed into Taco Bell for lunch, my cell phone rang. "You bastard! Where's my cell phone and my car?" she screamed. I was relieved she didn't call me an idiot this time. She was using the house phone, which was a good test. I could check the recorder later. "I'm sorry, honey. I had to get money to hire a lawyer for the homicide charges. I promise to get you another car once I'm out of jail," I said, ending the call and turning off my cell phone. After that conversation, I realized getting a lawyer was crucial. No matter what happened, I was determined not to stay married, but I had to wait. I was next in line to order. When I got home, Logan and Mason were there. I went straight to my sons, ignoring Lydia. I glanced at her a few times and noticed she wasn't happy. The boys eagerly showed me their models. When Lydia started preparing dinner, I wandered to the guest room. My clothes were back on the bed, Lydia's in the master bedroom. I chuckled but chose not to argue. She was stubborn and determined. Lydia told the boys to wash up for dinner, and I returned to the guest room to unpack. I would have loved to throw out her belongings, but that seemed too petty. Red Lobster was my treat tonight. Money wasn't an issue. I still had cash after the lawyer's deposit. The shrimp and lobster combo was delicious, but the cheese rolls were my favorite. After dinner, I turned on my cell phone, hoping for a call from work or Detective Hale. The first call I got was from Lydia, asking how she could go to the grocery store to pick up some items, including milk. I assured her that I'd take her shopping on the weekend when I was off work, suggesting it would be a good time for us to plan our trips together. I mentioned another call coming in and ended our conversation with a promise to talk later. The second call was from Ethan, who let me know that Detective Hale had interviewed the entire crew, both individually and as a group, and everyone's stories had aligned. He added that Jack Everett, the floor manager, had given strong support, emphasizing that Ethan couldn't have missed work. After tucking the boys in, I found Lydia lounging on the couch with a glass of wine. I grabbed a cold Foster's and settled into my recliner, hoping to have a real conversation. When I brought up her plan to paint me as the villain, it abruptly ended the discussion. Lydia finished her wine and retreated to her bedroom, clearly uninterested in talking. Disappointed, I sipped my beer and checked the phone recorder. The first call was to her sister. No cover-up there. Diana knew about the affair with Dominic and supported Lydia. That wasn't surprising. The next call, however, was to Lydia's mom, who was clueless. Lydia convinced her that Dominic was a friend of Rachel's, and that I was jealous because I had been pursuing Rachel for years. Although she didn't directly accuse me of homicide, it was heavily implied. Lydia contacted the cell phone company about replacing the phone I took, but had no luck. She reached out to the DMV to report her driver's license lost and was advised to inform the police. When she called the bank to request a new credit card, she discovered the account was closed. I had to give her credit for being proactive. The final call on the machine was to Rachel. Even though Rachel lived nearby, they chose to talk by phone instead of meeting in person, which worked in my favor. From that call, I gleaned two important details. Dominic's friend Wally was still coming from Detroit, and Lydia planned to lay low until his arrival. The next morning, I got up early with the boys and left the house before Lydia woke up. We returned home after lunch, and Lydia demanded I drive her to the grocery store since she had no car or driver's license. That evening, while she prepared dinner, I checked the recorder again. Wall-E had arrived and immediately called Lydia. Their conversation was revealing. He believed Lydia's story and was determined to seek revenge. Wall-E and Dominic had been childhood friends, and he was hell-bent on justice. He provided Lydia with his contact information and told her to call him the next day. Afterwards, Lydia excitedly phoned Rachel, expressing her happiness. It was hard to believe this was the same woman I'd been married to for years. Her transformation was sudden and complete. I never imagined my actions, aside from confronting her lover, would lead to such a drastic change. Before turning in, I grabbed a burger, using the need to mow the lawn as an excuse to avoid Lydia. The next day, around 11 a.m., Lydia's parents showed up to take the boys for an unplanned sleepover. I didn't object. Grandma Wilcox assured me they'd be back in time for school the next day. Eager to check the phone recorder, I waited until after lunch since I skipped breakfast. Following a quick shower, I headed to Denny's. Lydia made no mention of my absence. She and Wally had concocted a plan to avenge Dominic's death, which seemed ludicrous given my knowledge of the situation. Their plan involved Wally entering the house through the back deck sliding door, which Lydia assured him would be unlocked. If all went as planned, it would look like a burglary gone wrong, with me being shot. Both Lydia and Rachel were to call emergency services upon hearing the gunshot. At that moment, I realized I hadn't updated my insurance policy beneficiaries. As I left, I sarcastically blew a kiss to my wife, who responded with a middle finger. I had dinner with my parents and stayed the night. Before leaving, I borrowed Dad's snake charmer, a short-barreled 20-gauge, for the upcoming event. Lydia was in bed when I returned home, presumably reading. The lone message on the answering machine was from Rachel, boasting about her and Wallace's pleasurable afternoon. Before signing off, she assured Lydia of their readiness. Late that night, I spent about 20 minutes swapping out the buckshot in the shells with rock salt, using a leftover bag from last winter. My intention wasn't to kill Wally, but to incapacitate him. Honestly, I hadn't wanted to hurt Dominic either. I hoped Wally didn't have a bad heart like Dominic did. Wanting to check the back deck door, I hesitated, fearing Wally might see me. I had to trust Lydia had left it unlocked. I stripped down to my shorts and messed up the bed blankets. A cup of coffee would have been nice, but since none was available, I settled for a drink, waiting in my recliner with the cell phone close by. He didn't arrive until after midnight. Spotting him on the deck, I promptly dialed emergency services, reporting an intruder and expressing fear for my life. Keeping the line open, I watched the patio door slide open quietly, revealing Wall-E. I waited until he was fully inside before delivering the first blast. I aimed for his lower body to avoid killing him. The first shot knocked him back under the deck. With the second shot, he tumbled over the side, breaking the railing. I knew I hadn't killed him as he howled in pain. Man, that rock salt must have hurt. The shotgun blast was deafening indoors. My ears were ringing when I turned on the lights. Lydia was already in the living room screaming. Although she was shouting at me, her words were unintelligible. I approached to check on Wally and noticed a Ruger .22 automatic pistol with a silencer on the floor. Lydia continued to scream, so I aimed the shotgun in her direction, causing her to quickly quiet down and flee the room. It appeared Wally had broken his ankle in the fall. Some guys seemed to have all the luck. 10 minutes later, the first police car arrived, and there wasn't much discussion. I set the shotgun on the floor to avoid any misunderstandings, pointed to the phone, and informed the officers that everything was under control. When asked about other occupants, I mentioned Lydia in the bedroom. They brought her into the living room, and despite their efforts to calm her, she continued to shout hysterically. A large female officer gently escorted her outside. I noticed Rachel standing with some neighbors, observing the commotion. I gave her a mocking grin and drew my finger across my throat, causing her to quickly walk away. EMTs arrived to tend to Wally just as Detective Hale showed up. He smiled at me, and I couldn't help but grin back, a bit of defiant sass in my expression. The female officer escorted Lydia back inside to get dressed. Once ready, we all headed to the police headquarters. I requested separate cars, and Detective Hale agreed, letting me ride with him. We didn't speak on the way downtown, but he kept glancing at me with a knowing smile. By the time Hale released me, the sun had risen. Although we only talked for about 30 minutes, they kept me at the station all night, making me drink coffee. A police car drove me home, and I was disappointed not to see yellow tape around the house. Everything looked normal. Even the rock salt hadn't damaged the glass door. Wally had taken the brunt of it. Fixing the broken railing would take about an hour, I estimated. I went to bed and didn't wake up until well past noon. After stumbling to the bathroom, I found Detective Hale sitting at the kitchen table, engrossed in the newspaper and sipping coffee, which he presumably brewed while I slept. Having had enough coffee the night before, I opted for a tall glass of orange juice and sat across from him, puzzled about how he had entered the house. "You're a cool customer, Mr. Collins," he remarked, not looking up from the paper. Unsure how to respond, I remained silent, wondering if he was testing me. Finally, I spoke. "Detective Hale, I need a shower, a shave, and some lunch. Ill treat unless it violates some police protocol." "Take your time, Nate. I've got all day," he replied. As I headed to the shower, I pondered when he found time to sleep. Lunch consisted of 2 hefty pulled pork sandwiches, and Hale even joined me in washing them down with a beer. The silence grew heavy until he broke it. "You have questions, don't you, Mr. Collins?" "Funny, I thought the same about you," I retorted. Hale flagged down the waiter for 2 more beers. "I spent the whole night grilling you. Now it's your turn." "Okay, first off, where's my wife?" "She's still in custody. Charges will be filed this afternoon." Downing my beer, I processed the unexpected news. I had a flood of questions but decided not to delve too deeply. Instead, I remarked, "Nice to see Lydia's folks rallying for her, as I won't be. No more questions, Detective Hale, but if you have something to spill, go ahead." He chuckled, taking a swig. "One more thing. Did you happen to overhear or record any conversations between your wife and Mr. Williams?" "You mean Wally?" That earned me a smirk. "If I did have such a recording, would you want it?" "I'm unsure. If things unfold as I anticipate, it may not matter, but if they get skilled lawyers, having such evidence could be troublesome." "Right, you're onto something. I'm just trying to streamline my job. I'll manage without a hypothetical tape." I nodded slightly. "Thanks, Nate boy. I think I should drive you home. Your boys will return from school soon and will need their father." We reached the house just as Logan and Mason got off the school bus. They approached us, and I introduced them to my new detective friend. They were eager to see his badge and ask questions. However, the mood shifted when Hale inquired, "So, who built the tugboat and who assembled the monster truck?" "I built the truck," Logan exclaimed proudly, while Mason declared, "I did the tugboat. Want to see it?" With a promise to inspect them another time, Hale departed, leaving me stunned. He knew about the pink paint predicament and had the upper hand. Feeling cornered, we ordered pizza for dinner, and the boys didn't ask about their mom's whereabouts. After supper, Lydia's dad called, asking for help to raise bail money for her release. Politely, I declined, wondering if he fully grasped the situation. When I inquired about her accommodation, he hesitated before stating she would stay with them. We loaded Lydia's belongings into the pickup and dropped them off without incident. Returning home, I noticed a U-Haul truck in Rachel's driveway, which disappeared the next morning. Lydia never reached out, leaving me to gather updates from the daily newspaper. There was no trial. Lydia pinned all the blame on Wally, who claimed it was her idea. Both took plea deals, with Lydia receiving 3 to 5 years for conspiracy to commit homicide and Wally getting 5 to 10 years for attempted homicide. Federal authorities were involved regarding Wallace's silencer, but postponed action until he served his initial sentence. Detective Hale never needed the tape and stopped mentioning it. Rachel vanished without a trace. My dad retrieved his shotgun, joking that I might need it again someday. Chuckling, he mentioned that Lydia served me with divorce papers once her jail term began. She didn't contest anything. It was clear she wanted nothing to do with me. Since the night I shot Wally, I hadn't seen or spoken to her. I sold the house and moved back in with my parents, unable to manage work and care for the boys alone. My colleagues welcomed me back, offering a switch to the day shift, but I declined. I regularly took the boys to visit their mother at Moni Women's Prison. During these visits, I stayed in the car, usually for less than an hour, sometimes watching them through the chain-link fence if the weather was good. I didn't discuss the visits with the boys and asked them not to share any details. This arrangement seemed to work well for us, until I got the phone call. "Hello, is this Nathaniel Collins?" "Yes, speaking." "I'm Isabella Rivera. Detective Marcus Hale suggested I reach out to you. There are matters we need to discuss." "I'm aware, but why do you want to talk to me?" "Dominic Santoro was my brother." "Oh, great. Just when I thought I'd put all this behind me, now this. I understand, but I don't think avoiding this conversation is wise. I'm sorry for your loss, but I can't assist you." I ended the call before she could say more. 2 days later, she called and proposed to meet. I replied, "Let's meet Saturday morning at 10 o'clock at the showroom. I'll bring my 2 sons. They enjoy looking at old cars." I didn't know her intentions, but felt safer in public with my boys. I wasn't using them as a shield, but hoped she'd be less likely to do anything. I realized I was overthinking. I needed a beer. I called Detective Hale, who laughed and advised me to meet with her and stop worrying. Easy for him. He didn't eliminate her brother. Continental Classics was an impressive place, with a main showroom and 2 large buildings at the back for cars needing restoration or display. I was surprised to find they were having a grand opening celebration. There were many things I didn't understand. Mason and Logan seemed torn between the cars and the freebies. The first thing that caught my attention was the smell of the popcorn machine. A person in floppy shoes and a rubber nose was handing out small bags of hot popped kernels. Nearby, there was a soda machine, and another person with a hot dog cart. The boys wouldn't need lunch today. Recognizing Isabella Rivera was easy. She walked toward me with a slow, purposeful stride that exuded confidence and determination. Her Italian heritage was unmistakable. Dark hair, dark eyes, olive complexion, and broad hips. While some might not have noticed her hips, they stood out given her short stature, barely 5 feet tall. Dominic had been a towering figure, but Isabella was compact and sturdy. My unease grew as she approached, but it eased when I saw a smaller version of her by her side, a young girl of about 10 who looked just like her, with lighter hair and a more delicate frame. It seemed we both found solace in our children's presence. As Isabella reached me, she extended her hand. "Nathaniel Collins, I presume." I shook her hand, feeling a sense of familiarity, like a scene from an old movie. Despite her smile, there was a hint of nervousness in her eyes, which oddly made me feel more at ease. "Thank you for meeting with me," she began, her voice steady but with an edge of tension. "I want us to understand the business thoroughly so we can take control. In the meantime, it's important that you assert yourself." Isabella admitted that her kindness had led Dominic and his wife to try to take advantage of her. Her tone softened as she talked about their failed attempt, and I found myself chuckling at the irony. Over the next half hour, we discussed the terms of our arrangement. Isabella offered better pay and benefits than my factory job, with the option to return if things didn't work out, though I hoped they would. On the way home, Logan looked queasy, probably from too many hot dogs and sodas, while Mason seemed to enjoy chatting with Arya more than looking at cars, a good sign. Logan got sick in the truck and skipped supper. I started at Continental Classics the following Monday. As Isabella predicted, I quickly got the hang of things and earned the support of the employees, especially Grant's cousin, who became my strongest ally. Most wanted the business to succeed and were quick to report any issues. Isabella handed over the responsibility of firing employees to me, a task I found surprisingly satisfying. My reputation as a no-nonsense manager grew. Detective Hale stopped by often for coffee, and although our conversations were mostly casual, he eventually opened up to me. 3 years ago, I was a cop in Philly, he said one day. Came home to find my wife in bed with my supervisor. I lost it, threw her out, and the department told me to quit or be fired. I moved here and found work, but not before making sure my wife's lover lost his job. I didn't press for more details, but his story explained why he seemed to favor my side. The boys agreed not to tell their mother about my new job during visits. They mentioned the long drive casually, understanding it was necessary. I wanted Lydia to see her sons, not out of concern for her, but because I knew it would hurt her. It was a cruel satisfaction, but I took it anyway. Isabella and I began spending more time together, both at work and outside of it. One weekend, the boys insisted on taking her and Arya to Noble's Grove. Mostly we stayed close to home due to our living situations, which complicated any potential romance. While I was interested in a closer relationship with Isabella, it wasn't practical. I still lived with my parents and the boys, and Isabella and Arya shared a small studio apartment. With the business doing well, Isabella started looking for a house. She spent hours online, searching for the perfect one. My first clue about her intentions came when she mentioned wanting a 4-bedroom home for the boys. "Nate, I think each boy should have his own room. It's better to plan for that now than later, don't you agree?" I realized this was more than just a practical suggestion. Isabella was thinking about a future together. The possibility of a deeper relationship seemed real. "Yeah, that's a great idea. A split-bedroom plan would be even better. I don't like the idea of them being too close to the master bedroom," I added, trying to sound casual before leaving the office. Isabella's small smile reflected the unique bond we shared. Even though we hadn't engaged in romantic intimacy, I felt a deeper connection with her than I ever did with Lydia in our 12 years together. 2 days after finalizing my divorce from Lydia, we celebrated quietly at Red Lobster. The kids were oblivious to the significance, but Isabella knew. Later, back at the apartment while the kids watched a movie, Isabella kissed me in the kitchen. We laughed and hugged until Arya caught us. "Whoops, sorry, Mom," she said, adding with a grin, "It's about time." For the rest of the evening, Isabella and I kept things platonic, but the anticipation of what lay ahead was palpable. The next day, with the kids at school, we took an extended lunch break and returned to the apartment, overflowing with pent-up energy. We didn't get back to work until just before the end of the day. Over time, our extended lunches became a regular thing, and Isabella grew more serious about finding a new house. Detective Hale often stopped by for casual visits, sometimes admiring the cars. He developed a particular fondness for a Studebaker Hawk, previously owned by Leonard Blackwood, and Isabella offered him a good deal on it. Then, out of the blue, Isabella asked if I could take her to visit Lydia. Despite our reduced number of visits, Lydia didn't seem to mind. When I asked why, Isabella simply said, "Closure." Although I grasped the term, the concept felt somewhat foreign to me. I offered to go in with her, but Isabella insisted I just drive her, saying I didn't need to be present for their conversation. On a warm, sunny fall day, we arrived at Muni Women's Prison. Since visits were held outside, I parked near the fence. 10 minutes later, Lydia and Isabella emerged into the exercise yard and sat at a table, chatting and smiling as if they were long-lost friends. But after a few minutes, Lydia's smile faded, and she leaned across the table, scowling at Isabella. Meanwhile, Isabella remained calm and cheerful. Suddenly, Lydia lunged at Isabella. The guards quickly intervened, dragging my ex-wife back inside as she shouted angrily. Isabella glanced at me, smiled, and shrugged before leaving the visitors' area. She was still grinning when she got back to the car. "What was that all about?" I asked, puzzled. "Your ex-wife is quite sensitive," Isabella replied with a hint of amusement. After driving for a while, she turned to face me, straining against her seatbelt. I introduced myself and she seemed happy to see me. Everything was fine until she thought I was on her side. I might have misled her a bit at first. "How exactly?" I pressed. "I told her I came from Baltimore seeking revenge. She assumed I meant revenge against you. And what did you really mean?" "I meant taking over Dominic's business as a form of retribution. I suppose you can still seek revenge on a dead person, right?" "Okay, but what made her so furious?" "She wanted all the details, when, where, and how. She was talking about you." I was intrigued. "What did you tell her?" "I told her it would take time and asked if she wanted updates. She was eager to know and insisted on specifics. When I explained my plan, she lost it. She went absolutely ballistic." All right. What was your plan?" Her smile widened. I told her I was going to work you to death. That's all? Yep. Isn't it funny? I thought she might get angry, but I didn't expect such a dramatic reaction. We both sat there, smiling in the silence. I felt a surge of pride for Isabella. When do you plan to start this scheme? I teased. As soon as we get to the next motel, silly. 2 months later, Isabella and I got married in a simple ceremony in the backyard of our new home. Isabella sent Lydia a wedding invitation with a brief note. Everything is proceeding as planned. Expect him to be exhausted in 40 or 50 years.